So before we get started, we are definitely not professional boat builders. None of us had done this before. We had no idea what we were doing, so we hope we did a good job, but don't take us as the experts.
That's right. So why did we even decide to build a nesting dinghy?
So some cruising friends that we met, Ken and Edith on SV Larky, had one on their previous boat when they went cruising several years ago and absolutely loved it and all the benefits, the larger size and the small storage on deck.
We had also been thinking about moving to a larger dinghy at some point anyway, just so we had more capacity for passengers and for load.
Yep. So basically a nesting dinghy gives us a bigger, lighter weight boat in a smaller space.
We had two plans that we were looking at. One was Denny Green, but we had to get those plans via snail mail, and he's in Bermuda. There was no real guarantee on when we'd get them or how long that would take to even get here if they did show up. The other one was the Bateau, and it's a Fishbote 11, which is what we chose. We could download the plans online and get started straight away.
Yep. So the design was actually for a sailing dinghy. We decided to keep it really basic to start off with, just do the rowing dinghy, and we can add the sailing part at some point in the future if we want to. No es posible un medio by una. Es muy pequeño, ¿sí?
Maybe.
Sí.
Our biggest challenge going into this was going to be obtaining all the required materials that we knew we would need.
La
otra para en la resina para. This turned out to be a huge understatement. We spent most of our time searching in vain for materials that would be easy to find in the US, but here in Mexico it was near impossible to find a few of the basic things that we needed. Es como este, pero no. So the other main component of our boat is epoxy, which didn't exist down here. We found there's polyester resin here, but it's a huge variance in grades and quality. It's basically shipped in a big drum and then scooped out into soda bottles and sold at the store, so you have no idea how old it is, if you're getting stuff from the same batch or not. So in addition to the epoxy, we also had a hard time finding a filler and translating that we needed a thickening agent that was strengthened with little fibers just wasn't coming across, or it's something they don't have down here. Es como los fibres como la sheet, pero más pequeño, más fina. Sí. So we ended up settling for something called Blanco España, which we basically think is like a Bondo or some kind of fairing compound.
So we're at the
local hardware store.
Yeah.
It's a small little store, but it's pretty well stocked.
Really helpful here though. Talked to these guys a few times because we've bought other stuff from here. And we're going to do
super nice, helpful guy, willing to deal with our bad translations of all these construction words. But really
You're
helpful.
doing it all. We've got to find this list of supplies, translating it into Spanish. And how do we tell what a hardwood is? Because that seems to be a challenge. Turns out we spent many more days searching for items that we didn't even think would be hard to find, but were. It turns out it was a good thing too, because it helped us figure out ways to make do with what we had.
Yep.
340.
340? Okay. So, 340 pesos. Like 12 bucks or so?
Yeah.
Cuatro.
Sí.
So I talked with the manager of the dock there and got us some working space right next to their little security guard house. And we also had the use of electricity for 110 pesos a day, about 5 US a day. Our workspace though wasn't the greatest. It was only elevated about 10 inches off the ground, and that was our home for 3 weeks. And the 10 inches that were elevated ended up being the vents for the septic tank. And yes, it did smell like a septic tank.
So the main component of the dinghy is a 1/4-inch plywood. We could not find any marine plywood anywhere, even searching in La Paz, nothing in the 1/4-inch thickness. So we opted for a lower grade ply, the best quality we could find that wasn't technically marine grade. We had Fido from Mardi Arena Villas and Whale Watching offer the use of his van when he was heading into the large town of Constitution to pick up some lumber for us from the lumber yard, which meant we didn't have to put thin 1/4-inch ply on top of Fred's little VW rental car.
So the plans, which came with both a US and a metric version, called for us to lay out a 1-foot grid across 3 sheets of ply so that we could lay out our cuts.
And 12. Because it's a straight and an angle. The ply and some stiffening 1x2s would be all that we needed for the dinghy mostly, other than a little bit of fiberglass on the seams.
We had extra help for almost the entire process. My dad was nice enough to fly down from Washington State and bring his expert woodworking and carpentry experience. He rented a car from Laredo and drove over and jumped right in and had quite the interesting time for his first trip to Mexico. The resin into there.
Hillary and I had never worked with polyester resin before, and finding the mix ratio was something new to us. The local mix ratio was a few drops in a bottle cap to 1 bottle of Coke.
Hola, buenos días.
Yes.
¿Cómo va? ¿Todo bien?
Sí, necesitamos el correcto proporción a resina y secante y probar. Day 2, trying to figure out
Secante?
resina y secante.
Oh, that's right. Secante.
Proportion is a few drops of hardener to resin.
Well, we've had more than one opinion
We
too,
have.
right?
We're doing test batches to see. So this is how the resin, epoxy resin comes.
What is that? Is it a grape Coke?
Well, it's a Coke, it's a
Regular
Fresca
Coke.
cap on a
Oh.
Coke bottle. It said if you don't know the exact proportions, you should contact the manufacturer. So we're going to give Coke
We'll give
a
Coke a
call
call.
later today.
Do we do any more of these ends, or?
And everyone in town seems to have their own ratio of how many drops of secante, hardener, that you put in. So our test for 5-to-1 did not work. And 10-to-1 set up in, it's hot now, 5 minutes. This was about 2 minutes, and then it got really hot, and this was about 5 minutes for 10-to-1. So we are trying a 20-to-1 ratio now.
All the local resins varied slightly. It led us down to do our own testing and research, which we found to be between 1 and 3%. We opted for probably around about 1.5 to 2% for most of our mixes, which seemed to work well with our conditions and environment. We did lots of testing and never really had perfect consistency with the varied temperature throughout the day being outdoors. We always had different results.
So, had a good morning this morning.
Made some progress.
Some progress.
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 Progress. We found, yesterday actually, we found that there is a local Ponga building place in town. And they have some supplies. And this is what resina looks like from them versus the brown stuff in the other Coke bottles. So we did a few tests with this, and this seems to be much more consistent.
Polyester resin.
Yes, we
They had
discovered
like 10 or something plus 50-gallon barrels of this polyester resin.
Yes, we learned all about polyester resin yesterday as well, which was new to us.
Yeah, but the consistency of the other stuff was a problem. We weren't getting consistent setting times and stuff.
So there are multiple ways suggested how we could join the ply, as the panels for the sides of the boat spanned 2 sheets of ply. We opted to go simple and just butt jointed them together and fiberglass both sides of them.
As opposed to scarfing the joints together, which was way more complicated for the tools and the workspace that we had. In hindsight, we probably should have just fiberglassed the sheets of ply as a whole together as a butt joint and then cut the panels out afterwards.
A baby bottle. We got a little medicine cup.
Using plastic kitchen wrap to put underneath and over the butt joints to prevent them from sticking seemed to work. We should have removed the plastic wrap a little bit earlier though, because we couldn't actually get the plastic wrap off without doing a little light sand first.
So unlike epoxy, this unwaxed polyester resin that we had to work with will stay tacky indefinitely if not sealed. Some of the items we found we used in abundance were paintbrushes, plastic cups, and popsicle sticks. We couldn't find any hardware store carrying mixing containers, as they all just kind of mix it in the old bottles. So we opted for some regular drink cups from the grocery store. The mixing popsicle sticks that we used were found at some random restaurant supply store that we happened to wander into when we were in the big city of Constitution. Well, we've been multitasking. We've also been making desserts along with the dinghy of lollipops. Before it becomes a lollipop, it's a gummy bear, and before that, it's a jello. So starting with one of the middle bulkheads mounted upside down, we began to build the boat around this.
This is going to have to come this way.
Blue.
What are you doing?
As we started forming the bow and it began to take shape, we knew we'd need to account for the high kick at the bow, which would also be awesome for keeping us dry and provide good towing. It's right on here.
Con fibro
Y lo demás pura madera.
sí, el otro solamente ella.
Ok. Está quedando.
Sí, no hay mucho peso. Es fácil para abajo de.
No.
No, sí.
Está bien.
The stitching is accomplished by drilling very small holes about a half an inch from the edge of the seam, and then threading a small piece of the galvanized wire through the hole and twisting it together, and then slowly making adjustments to hold everything in the correct place. Resulted in quite a few bloody finger pokes from the wire, but at the end of the day it was a bit tedious, but pretty easy. So the morning we did the stitching, Ty was busy with a few other projects, but luckily Ken jumped right in and got underneath to help us out. So the basic premise of our dinghy is a stitch and glue boat, which basically means the pieces are stitched together, which we used wire for, and then glued. The seams are glued with either an epoxy or a resin mixture. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on the completion of the dinghy and our future adventures.
Yeah, watch those. Sorry, I got
I know, I got one over.
I got double wounds.